Hey Critical Analysis, welcome to your Chapter 1 lecture video. So this video is just going to go over the lecture, the content of Chapter 1. I'm not going to get into the assignments, the vocabulary, or anything like that, but I do just want to remind you on the Start Here section, there is a link to your textbook, which I already have up and running over here. And then you have your links to your syllabi. Once you get into the lessons area, you can see that the introduction video, if you have not watched that already, please make sure you do so. It is embedded right there underneath another link to your textbook. So I'm going to click into week 1. You can see again like the snapshot over week 1. This is what the objectives are. And under the watch folder, there's another place where the introduction video is, so you can have multiple access points to that. Here's your vocabulary video, so I encourage you to watch that separately. It is Chapter 1 vocabulary. Your Chapter 1 assignment video will be in here as well. And then obviously this video is embedded in this area additionally. So for week 1, I'm going to pull up under where it says read. There's another link to the text. So I'm going to click on that and have Chapter 1 up and going in the background. And then I'm also going to go to the review folder. And I'm going to pull up the Chapter 1 PowerPoint, which is going right here. Okay, so those are the materials I'm going to utilize. Oftentimes with our class, I will utilize kind of a mixture of the PowerPoint and the chapter to talk to you about the concepts that are going on within your chapter. For right now, I'm going to pretty much rely kind of heavily on the PowerPoint and then reference the text whenever applicable. All right, so Chapter 1, as you can see, have the learning objectives here. These are the things we're going to talk about in this chapter. So we're going to be talking about making sure that we're active in our reading. We're not just a passive reader. We're really taking in information, working with it. We're going to try to improve our concentration, our reading rate, our comprehension, looking at different areas of why we get distracted while we read, and also comprehension type testing processes. Before we jump into that, I want you to take a look at this right here. I want you to see if you can fill in these blanks, and you can do it informally, just kind of read through it on your own, or you can jot these down. If you need to pause the video here and look at the screen, or you can pull your own PowerPoint up and look at it that way. I just want you to see if you can go through and fill in all those missing pieces with the beginning letters. Okay, if you haven't paused or tried it, do so now because I'm going to move on to give you the answers. All right, here is what the PowerPoint really has for answers. How'd we do? Yeah, normally I have students really surprised by this. In this one right here, they'll normally say things like parents as they raise children, infancy are not easy to answer, come down here. Boys and girls, bed, room, dark. There's a couple that are, dark and sunshine. So the point of this little exercise, I think it's a fun way to demonstrate that sometimes when we read, we think we know what we're reading, although maybe we read too quickly, or we don't use context clues, or we don't question what we're reading. And so this is just a fun way to demonstrate, hey, whenever we're reading, especially for academic purposes, we need to slow down a little bit. We need to double check. We need to reread. We need to look for clues. And so that's what this chapter will somewhat focus on as well. So reading takes practice. So what do we mean by reading? This is basically saying, here's what we mean. Drawing meaning from the printed page and then interpreting and applying that information. So all of us bring different background knowledge and background experiences with us. And so sometimes we can all read the same text, but draw different meaning from it. And that's okay. It's just then how do we interpret it? How do we apply it? So part of that does mean we have to look at reading as a process. And I often equate this to writing. A lot of people will just understand that writing is a process. You have to brainstorm and draft again and edit and peer review and all these different steps. And we know that we're not going to produce the perfect piece of writing the first time. The same can be said for reading. You're not going to read something through every time and 100% understand it. There are times where you're going to have to go back and reread. You're going to go and look something up. You're going to have to ask questions. And yes, that takes more time, but it also helps you understand. And so when students will say, I'm not a good reader, I always have to reread, or I have to stop and look something up, that's okay. That means you're recognizing that something's not going right with your reading. And so how can we become a stronger reader? Well, there are things we need to do during the reading process, before, during, and after reading. So here are some things we want to do before. And if you don't do any of these, I want to challenge you to start at least incorporating 1 or 2 of these strategies, excuse me, in each of these areas of reading, before, during, and after, to see if this improves your comprehension, if it improves your focus, your goals. So you get a chapter. I'm going to have you preview it. So you could practice that right now with our chapter 1. You can pull up your chapter 1. You can go ahead and start kind of clicking through, scrolling down, looking at the different sections. Previewing typically takes anywhere from 30 seconds to just a couple minutes. It just depends on the length of the piece. But what you're doing is you are trying to understand how the textbook is set up. What are the sections? How are they labeled? How are they organized? Here's some other things. You're looking at, the headings, the subheadings, the bold, the italics, the graphics. So you're looking at all of those different things. So you might take a look at the table of contents in a textbook. You might look at the author, the preface. You go to the back of the book and see what kind of aids are, is there a glossary? Is there an index? When you look at the chapter level, you look at headings and subheadings, graphics, margins, beginning of chapter, questions, or end of chapter questions and summaries. So all of these things that you're doing while you're previewing. And one of the things I like to have students do to kind of help, because I don't know if you've ever been reading something and you're on page 1 and then all of a sudden you're on page 10, you're like, I have no idea what I just learned in the last 10 pages. Or you just kind of glaze through your reading just so you can check it off your to-do list and say you've read it. So previewing can get you kind of activating your prior knowledge, really looking and seeing, what do I know, what don't I know? And sometimes you might not know what you don't know. So you can take these headings and subheadings and turn them into questions. And so our textbook does that quite frequently already. You can see a lot of these subheadings have questions in there. But for this one, for instance, how can I help my brain absorb new information? Turn these headings into questions. That can give you more focus so that while you are reading, you have predetermined questions, because sometimes your instructors may not give you a purpose. They may say something like, hey, read chapter 3 and I'll see you Thursday. And you're not sure what to do with that. So setting your own questions, setting your own purpose can be helpful for that. So look through, get a feel for how it's set up, how the chapter is structured, because you're activating prior knowledge and you're laying a foundation. Other things you want to be doing is talked about up here, setting goals, making predictions, paraphrasing, and summarizing. So we're going to take about each of these as we preview. So now we've talked about previewing. Now we want to clarify your purpose. Why are you reading this? So again, this kind of alludes back to what I just said. Your teacher may give you the purpose. Read this chapter, you have a quiz. Read this chapter, you have to discuss it. Sometimes you don't have a purpose, and that's where turning the headings into questions can be helpful. Really trying to have a goal for reading. That way, by the time you're done with your chapter, you can go back and be like, all right, I need to answer these questions. You also may need to think about activating your prior knowledge, and that's previewing helps you do that. What do I already know about this? What have I learned in previous classes or previous experiences, and start making those connections. And then how difficult is the material going to be for you? If you're reading a 20-page chapter on something you're really familiar with, even though it's 20 pages, it's probably not going to take you very long. It's probably not going to be too challenging. If you're reading something on 5 pages on a brand new, very difficult topic, that might take you longer. That might be more difficult. So what kind of resources do you need to have with you? So you preview, you set your purpose, you take some time to really activate and understand what you're reading. Now you're going to do the reading. So these are some while you are reading strategies. So you're going to check your comprehension. So this is where I said, you don't want to get to page 10 and realize you've been lost the entire time. So maybe you want to chunk up your reading. You want to really, if you have 10 pages, stop every 2 pages and just real quick, how can I restate what I've just learned in my own words? What is going on here? How can I summarize this? What is the author trying to say? Compare what I'm reading to what I already know. And if I realize I'm lost after 2 pages, are there graphics that can help me? Do I need to define anything? Do I need to look at, a couple paragraphs before, a couple paragraphs beyond? Do I need to get help? We need to make sure that you're constantly checking your comprehension. So you want to make sure that you are stopping every so often and really checking in with yourself. And this will come up later, but highlighting, annotating, note-taking, while you are reading, you don't want to do any of those things. So while you read your 2 pages or your 3 pages, pencil and paper and all of that, or notes down, then go back and look and see, all right, what was the most important piece here? What was really important in this section? And then highlight it, and then take notes on it or underline it. Because often what we do is if we highlight while we read, we think everything's important. And so we just highlight everything. And then we have a page that's all colorful. when in reality, you should not have more than about 25% of your page highlighted or underlined. So you really want to have some perspective. You want to read the section, then go back and take notes, then go back and highlight. Okay, so that's going to help you. And then, of course, reviewing. Sometimes we just close up the chapter, we think we're good. Even if you don't have a test, you want to still review. You want to go back to those questions you turned into from your headings and see if can you answer those. Can you make a study guide? Can you summarize those main points? Can you teach someone else the content? What else do you know, or what else do you need to go back and figure out? Do you need to reread anything? So those are all reviewing strategies. Reading is so important because most of what we learn in college is through reading. The College Reading Learning Association says up to around 80% of what we learn in a college environment is through reading. If you think about it, if you're taking online classes, or if you're taking a class where you have to read outside of class before you come to a lecture, you are doing a ton of reading. And so you really want to make sure you're investing that time so you understand the information. Right? So the rest of the chapter goes on to talk about what is active academic reading. And so a lot of these concepts we just talked about help us be more active. We don't want to be passive. Active academic reading is when we are engaging in these different strategies. And so when we are actively academic reading, we want to be purposeful. We want to use different resources to help us really focus our energy. And so you'll see that it talks about in our textbook here as well, cognitive psychology and how neuroscience plays a role in all of our different reading processes. Okay? And so why are we doing this? It helps us absorb new information, and we go over, we just kind of talked about all of these. We want to preview, we want to learn new vocabulary. The larger vocabulary base we have, the better our overall comprehension is going to be. So, and there's going to be a specific, chapter 4 talks about vocabulary, so I'll go into more detail there. But you want to try to read assignments before class. If you know on Wednesday you are going over chapter 2, you should read chapter 2 before class. That's going to help you set some prior knowledge. It's going to help you kind of focus what questions and what kind of notes you're going to take in class. Now, the question of, I get so distracted when I read. There's usually 4 purposes, 4 reasons that we get distracted, and this is going to go over those right here. So we have issues with concentration. We're not paying attention. There might be external distractions, so things going on around us. You live with other people, they're making noise. You're in a work environment and someone's talking. So things around you that are going to take you away. So how can you deal with that? Well, have a place that is specific for studying, whether it's if you have an office space in your house, if you go to a library, if you go on campus, your dining room table at 10 o'clock at night, whatever it might be. Use a calendar so that during that time, it is strictly dedicated to your schoolwork. And then make that a priority and schedule things around that study time, because while you're in school, it should be one of your top priorities. I'm not saying the priority, because obviously we have other things going on, but it should be in your top several priorities, right? You're investing a lot of time and energy into your future, which means you do need to focus on your reading and your studying while you're here. You might also have some internal distractions, so things that are kind of popping up, and I know I'm guilty of this. I'll sit down to study or record a lecture or whatever it might be, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I've got to get my son's, this is literally what I'm thinking today, y'all. I have to go get my son's birthday cookies for his class tomorrow. I have to go and pick these up. So what I do is I get a Post-it note out and I kind of jot those things down so that while I am recording a lecture or while I am doing my reading, I know that, okay, when I'm done with this, then I can turn my attention into those things. And so that's what this slide talks about. Make a worry list or a to-do list. Try to set a time goal. I'm going to record for 20 minutes. I'm going to study for an hour. I'm going to go over my flashcards for 15 minutes so that you're really trying to focus that energy and that time during that time period you set aside. This next section talks about reading rate. This is another complaint students will talk to me about is, I read too fast or I read too slow. And really, that's up to the individual. Some people like to read a little bit quicker, but I've had students who read very fast and they miss a lot of information. And then I have students who read very slowly and they can't comprehend because they're so laboring over their reading. So it doesn't matter necessarily the fastness or the slowness, it's what works for you. But some people do want to either slow down or speed up. And so here are some tips on maybe kind of getting your reading rate a little bit more adjusted. So you can skim depending on the purpose, skim and look at headings and first sentences, look at the information that's needed. and you can kind of see what your reading rate is. So take a reading selection and time yourself for a minute. How many words can you read in a minute? It's going to kind of give you an idea of your reading rate, and then you can work on either slowing down or speeding up depending on what you need. So if you feel like you read too slowly, here are some things you can help with your speeding that up. Concentrate on what you're reading. I mean, I don't care if you're 20, 30, 40, 50. If you need to use a ruler to kind of block out and space your reading, that's totally fine. Look at your text to preview it. We talked about these. Use a pen as a pacer, set a time goal. These are all ways that you can kind of help improve your reading rate. Okay, the rest of this PowerPoint kind of talks about reading comprehension tests. And so for some of you, this will be more applicable than others. Depending on how you gained entrance here, you may have already taken the AccuPlacer, you may have taken the ACT, so you already have a little bit of these reading comprehension. Some of you at the end of your program have to take a nursing licensure exam or some kind of certification, and so these are different kind of tips. Some of these you've probably heard tons of time. Get plenty of sleep, arrive early. When you're taking the test, make sure that you're reading to comprehend, anticipate what's coming next, slow yourself down because you don't want to rush, but you want to go at a steady pace. You want to make sure that you're looking at all of your options. You read all the options before choosing an answer. After your test, kind of think about how you did. How did it go? There are typically kind of the same type of comprehension questions, and this can kind of also guide what this whole course will talk about. So each of these next few slides will basically describe a chapter we're going to talk about. Main ideas is when what is the gist? What's the overall purpose of this particular passage? What are the details? What are the supporting details? What are they telling me more about the main idea? How can I make an inference? How can I use information that's hinted or suggested and come to a conclusion? What is the author's purpose and what kind of information are they presenting? Fact, opinion. What's my vocabulary? How can I build that vocabulary? Okay, so each of those correlate with the chapter in our textbook that we'll talk more about throughout the semester. All right, and then of course there's essay type questions, and these are tips on how to kind of guide through there. And then a locus of control. This is something that as a student we want to focus on. Do we have an external locus of control? Meaning, do we feel like our success and failure is based on other people or luck, which is not a healthy way to look at it? Or do we have an internal locus of control? Do we have control over our success and failure to a certain degree? Okay, so that's something to think about as well. All right, so that is the meat of the chapter. I encourage you now to go ahead and get into the actual chapter, and you can see that there are these sections. I really do think that this right here, the divided attention piece, is really helpful because there's a lot of research coming out in the last several years that really focus on the disadvantages of multitasking. Often people have thought that multitasking was such a helpful thing, but as this talks about, is actually it causes us to split our attention. Our product is less quality. It takes more time. And so this section really kind of hits that on there. So I encourage you to look through. There's all of these different subsections, different exercises and strategies. And some of this is going to come back to you in your Chapter 1 text and skill sheet. So I will talk about some of these strategies and some of these exercises inside your assignment video. And again, you can see all these sections we just talked about: reading rate, reading comprehension tests, and then the vocabulary video talks about these selections, as will your text and skill sheet. All right, so I encourage you, again, as I said, to take a look at your PowerPoint, go through the chapter, read the chapter to make sure that you are comfortable with Chapter 1, and then I'll see you in a future video.